All right, I want to quickly go over some medical stuff. Okay, the first thing you got to do is look at risk versus benefit. There's way too many powerful meds being given out like candy to little kids. I tend to, let's try some of the diets, the omega-3s, things like that on the little kids first before giving out powerful drugs. Then you've got to look at cost versus benefit, and there's some stuff out there that's a ripoff. And then what about evidence of effectiveness? Obviously, of course, I'd rather have scientific papers. But one of the problems we got in autism is not precise. So what happens is you're putting apples and oranges and grapes together in a study and calling them all the same thing, and maybe a diet only works for the apples, and you have the oranges and grapes mixed in there, it's going to come out showing it doesn't work. You see, it's not like patients with tuberculosis where you actually have a precise diagnosis. So I have two ways for evidence of effectiveness to me: scientific papers and studies, and the other thing is what I call good anecdotal. I've got to have at least 3 families that convince me that some intervention worked, and they didn't start ABA or something like that right at the same time. Hyperbaric oxygen has now been proven that doesn't work. Chelation, I've got one family where maybe possibly a mild version of it worked, but I also had a speech therapist tell me that every time the kid was chelated, he was worse, but I don't know what method they used. The scientific papers all come out awful on it. So I'm not very high on chelation. Diets, I've talked to so many people where it's worked, and even on me, my health really got turned around. B vitamins have also gotten my autoimmune problems in check, too. Okay, I like to divide medications into the heavy artillery and the light artillery, and the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, these are the light weapons. And one of the best ones is Prozac. Every time I get these 4 doctors' newsletters, every time I turn around, I'm reading something good about Prozac and something bad about Paxil. And Paxil's still got a patent extender on it, so the drug companies are pushing that. Probably the 2 best SSRIs on the shelf are Prozac and Zoloft. And they're $4 a month down at Walmart. But the thing, where these drugs really work is for anxiety. Not for depression, anxiety. Stopping the fear. I know a lot of visual thinkers that take Prozac, and it has not interfered with their ability to do their work. I've been getting memory complaints on Paxil, which concerns me. But if you're taking Paxil and you're doing well on it, you stay on it. If you're on a drug and then you hear something terrible about it, and you've been on it for a long time and it's been working well for you, you stay on it. But the thing you've got to be careful with these drugs is people give too high a dose. People on the spectrum often need a much lower dose. If you take too much, you will get all agitated like you drank 50 cups of coffee and you won't sleep at night, and it's going to make you crazy. And doctors are raising doses when they should be lowering. And they're treating the side effect of an overdose of Prozac with tranquilizers. Well, that's just idiotic. Nope, these are fantastic anti-anxiety medications. I'm taking an old tricyclic. And the doctors don't even like to give that out now because it's got a big cardiac warning. Well, I've been on it 30 years, so I'm not really worried about the black box. I don't care how many black boxes they put on it. But because if it was going to kill me, it would have done it a long time ago. But for some individuals, you can screw up the heart rhythms. Everything has risks, but the drug that I'm on, the old tricyclic, is actually a very, very effective drug. And the problem is when you take out side effects, you tend to take out main effects. Because drugs are dirty tools, and the pharmacologist told me 30 years ago, he says, drugs are dirty tools because they affect a lot of different parts of the body. Okay, here's the heavy guns. And there's a place where sometimes you need to use the heavy guns. But the problem is you have much more severe side effects, like really bad weight gain, the tardive dyskinesia shaking disorder, possibly getting diabetes from it. Risperidol was the original one of the atypicals, and it's shown in the scientific literature to work very, very well on aggression. But other things that might help on sound sensitivity of B6 and magnesium, too. But a very tiny microdose, like 1/4 milligram a day, made it so a lady named Donna Williams could tolerate large convention center. And it's not going to hurt you taking that teeny a dose. Risperidol is the original one of the atypicals, and it's probably the best one. Geodon, they tried to get rid of the weight gain problem, doesn't work very well. Zyprexa is the worst for making you fat, but it is absolutely the very best schizophrenia drug. See, again, you take out the main side effect, you take out the main effect. Abilify and Seroquel right now are still patented, where Risperidol isn't. So the drug companies are out there pushing Abilify and Seroquel in ways that I think are really irresponsible, where people are taking them as first line for depression and first line for bipolar. There's other things to be doing first. The low-dose principle applies to these three classes. SSRIs, that's Prozac and all the drugs similar to Prozac. The tricyclics, that's the old-fashioned stuff that I take, why I have to drink so much water, and the atypicals. You get too much, and then some of the atypicals, you fall asleep on them. Okay, what are some basic principles of using a medication? Try one thing at a time. I've been in places where a parent told me the doctor gave him 3 meds all at once. How do you know which works? You get away from the big medical centers. It's a wasteland in terms of how some of this stuff is done. A medication to be worth the risk should have an obvious beneficial effect. If it doesn't have an obvious beneficial effect, then you probably shouldn't be taking it. And if somebody's on a cocktail of garbage, you've got to take them off slowly. Like let's say somebody's been on a lot of the benzodiazepine drugs for years and years and years. You take those off suddenly, you can trigger a seizure. That would be a disaster. You've got to back off stuff slowly. Now, if you've tried something for 2 weeks and you hate it, you can just throw it out. But be careful switching brands of generics. They are not bioequivalent. I have found that just with my own medications. If you're taking the white pill from Walgreens, then stay with the white pill from Walgreens. Don't be switching them around. And don't expect any drug to give you 100% control, because it's not going to do it. You want to avoid the problem. Every time there's a meltdown or a problem, they're throwing more drugs at it. Because you've also got to look at behavior things too. You see, the way the brain works is cognitive behavior therapy works from the top down. In other words, it makes the cortex control the emotions. Drugs work down here in the primitive parts of the brain. Drugs hit the bottom. Psychotherapy and counseling hits the top. And what a lot of research has shown is that some of each is sometimes the most effective. You get into you get some people where they get into an extreme anti-medication thing. That's totally stupid. But on the other hand, throwing drugs all over everything is totally stupid too. It's like I hate the fight between alternative medicine and regular medicine. I'm using some of each. I take my tricyclic. I got to take a water pill for my ear because I have Meniere's disease, and I have to take them. I've tried weaning myself off; it doesn't work. And I'm doing a low carb and pretty much gluten-free diet. And the low carb is really important for controlling the yeast. And I'm taking Acidophilus bifidus, a real big heavy dose of it. And I'm taking this yeast cleanse stuff I buy at Whole Foods that if I forget to take it, I know it. So I think it works. And then I'm taking a good number of vitamins. Okay, here's an ancient old drug that's being rediscovered. If you have the kind of hot and sweaty anxiety, these can work like magic. Beta blockers are old-fashioned blood pressure pills. And wouldn't it make a lot more sense to take a blood pressure pill than to get addicted to the benzos or get messed up on the atypicals? And the reason why a lot of doctors today, especially younger doctors, are not prescribing these is that drug reps are out there pushing all the stuff that's still patented. And the stuff that's patented is the atypicals. They don't care about old ancient blood pressure pills, but the Army's experimenting with this stuff for post-traumatic stress syndrome. Okay, how about the seizure meds or the anticonvulsant drugs for mood stabilization and aggression? Depakote's one of the oldies, and it's one that's very effective. Now, the problem with these meds is they can have some really severe side effects, and one of them is messing up your liver. So you've got to do blood tests out of your arm to make sure it's not messing up your liver, and you have to do that. And then on the Lamictal, there's a rash you can get that's very, very dangerous. And if you get that, you've got to get off of it like absolutely instantly. And then the other one, Topamax, is safer, but doesn't work as well. And I've gotten some cognitive complaints. See, this is the problem when they're trying to develop medication. It's kind of a balancing act. You get rid of one side effect, you get something else. But if you don't have, the liver problem and the rash problem is probably genetic. And in the future, they'll have a test for that, and they can say, yeah, you can't take this stuff. But if you don't have those problems, these can be very, very effective drugs. Okay, ADHD drugs and autism, all the stimulants. Well, if you're kind of a mild Asperger, that's always getting mixed up with autism, with ADHD and Asperger's is always getting mixed up. Guess what? Stimulants work on both of them. That tells you something about the biology being the same. Where you get down into the more classically autistic, they tend to make them totally worse, and you'll know after one pill. That's kind of the deal on stimulants. They can work like magic and be absolutely wonderful. And the thing that's good about the stimulants, like Ritalin, it's a pretty safe drug. In terms of, you can drown rats in Ritalin and they still have their brains are not fried. You got to look up all your drug interactions, like all the interactions, all the prescription stuff, the non-prescription stuff. You got to look this stuff up. And the herbal supplements, like this yeast cleanse stuff, man, I was taking antibiotics and I found the antibiotics didn't work until I stopped taking the yeast cleanse stuff. And I looked the interactions up on the internet for 2 hours and I couldn't find them. So if you have to go on antibiotics or anti-rejection drugs or AIDS drugs, something really critical like that, you've got to be really careful with plant-based herbal things because they can make those drugs not work. I'd recommend getting off of them, if you have to be taking those kind of drugs. Special diets that work for some people. I can't emphasize enough the importance of exercise. And there's a brand new article in the American Journal of Psychiatry on the crappy U.S. diet. Of too much starchy carbs and sugar and everything like that, and more depression. I have a typical autism family history. My mother's side, my grandfather was an engineer who invented the automatic pilot. I've got some Asperger's on the father's side, anxiety and depression. There's a really strong genetic basis in autism. And what would happen to Einstein today? And Einstein, in a lot of school systems today, would be diagnosed as having autism. He had no speech until age 3. I actually have a letter at home from Einstein verifying that. And here's a great book on famous scientists and musicians that probably had some Asperger's. The thing is, the autism trait's really broad. And the thing is, it's a true continuum. When does geek and nerd become Asperger's? Well, there's no black and white dividing line. And I think the slides are going to stop right there. And it's been great to have everybody here, and I will be happy to take some questions.